Our next speaker, Roel Hartman, also from the Netherlands. So we have kind of a Dutch hour going on. He's an Apex guru, well-known speaker, and Oracle ACE director. And today he will be your wizard of ORDS. So I would like to say, Goedemorgen, Roel. Welcome. And
Goedemorgen.
Are you ready to show your magic? Okay.
I hope so. Let's see. So thank you all and welcome to this session about the Wizard of ORDS. So people that have seen the picture probably only know the newer version because this is the old version 1930 something this picture comes from. There's no Michael Jackson in there, no Diana Ross. So this is the original one. Let's say this. Let's skip the music. So a little bit about myself. My name is Roel Hartman. I'm a director of my own company, director of Apex Consulting. As Menno said, I'm an Oracle ACE director. Also an Oracle Groundbreaker ambassador and a director at ODTech. So ODTech, we have our annual conference, K-Scope, very well known in the community. And as all other conferences, we had to cancel that as well. But stay tuned, we will have something in store for you to compensate, just like we do, something like we do over here, but it might be different as well. We have not decided yet. And I hope to see you all next year in Nashville, of course. So what do I do when I'm not doing something with Apex or ORDS or Oracle in general? I like to go running. So about my running. So I like to run marathons. So I think if there are some medals down there, they're not all for marathons. So I did 7 now. I'm not in this picture because these are the front groups. Finishing is hard enough, so I keep it to that. I don't have to be the first one. I try to enjoy it, and enjoying probably goes until kilometer 30, and after that it's just suffering. But still, I want to do some more. So there was a next one was planned upcoming Sunday, but of course cancelled. So I hope to do another one in the fall. But let's see how it all works out. So what are we talking about? We're going to talk about Oracle REST data services. So what is it and what can we use it for? So ORDS, short way of Oracle REST data services, is the thing that's in the middle between your browser and your database. So if you do a request from your browser to your, like an Apex request or a web request, it goes to ORDS, and ORDS transfers it to the database. So the request is just an HTTP call, and ORDS magically transforms that in something that the database understands, like a SQL or PL/SQL call. The database gives you a result back to ORDS, and ORDS transfers that into a response to your browser that your browser understands. So there is some transformation going on inside ORDS. ORDS is a Java program. It passes and maps the request. So the request is something like, so if you're running in Apex, it's calling an F procedure. So F (P) is, so P are the parameters, F is the procedure. So it transforms that URL into something the database understands, and the result sets is just collect and map that the browser can understand. Can be HTML, can be JSON, can be XML, can be whatever the browser understands or whatever you're asking for. So there are a lot of cool features, and usually in the Apex world we just use ORDS as is. But there is way more in store that we can use in an Apex environment, but you can also use that as to support development in other environments that that like to use the Oracle database as the source of all truth. So to store your data, to modify your data, etc. So think about applications, apps, mobile apps, for instance, that are built with some kind of JavaScript framework. they might do some calls to your database, and ORDS will play a role in that. So the cool feature in that can be auto REST. So we're going to look into that. So the first thing is we're going to show is, but very important is you have to build your API like a wall, because if you're using REST to open up your database, you are actually opening up your database. So anyone, potentially anyone, can access your database. So you have to be very careful in doing so. Yeah, because you don't want a hacker to get into your database and get DBA privileges and do whatever he wants to do in your database. It's the hacker's point of entry, your API, so be aware of that. So if you're looking at your database, you could have something like this. So you have your data schema in your database, where all the real data is, your tables, etc. And on top of that, you should have an API schema. And your API schema is where the URL maps to. So you got an API URL mapping. You get to that in a second. And you got an API schema. So the schema is the one that's running your request from ORDS. So that schema should have as least privileges as possible. So how do we enable something like that? So therefore we have to run a script. So the first thing that we're going to do is run a script to get the schema and URL mapping done. So let's go to my page over here. So I'm going to run this script and run it on the Oracle Cloud. Hopefully. So what we're going to do now is, you see this statement at the start is ORDS enable schema. So what I'm doing right now is I'm running that on an API schema that I created earlier. You can see that here at the bottom. So it's the parsing schema, ORDS API, that will be running all my statements. And with the command ORDS enable schema, I enabled that schema for access from the outside world. And I'm using another name for that API. The name is API because that will return in the URL. So the ORDS API schema should not be in the URL because you don't want to give anything away. So your parsing schema should be hidden from the outside world. So URL mapping should not reflect the parsing schema. So API is very general, so your parsing schema should be something more obfuscated than just ORDS API. So this is the first step. I still can't do anything yet with my connection to my database because I just opened up the schema, and the schema is not allowed to do anything else than just be there. Next step is I'm going to enable an object. So I created a view because you have to be very careful. So all the data is stored somewhere else in the data schema. And this ORDS API schema is just allowed to create a view. And there is a view already created. And I'm going to enable that view for the access to the outside world. So I'm going to run that script, enable object. And object is a view, object type is a view, and object alias, again, I'm not giving away anything, so my API will contain the word customers, but should not contain the name of the object. So oops, getting back to my script here. I'm going to run that script, Visual Studio Code. Enable my object, customers view, as you can see in the middle of the screen. And now I have enabled something. So now I should be able to run something as well. So let's go to my Postman, my request here. So now I'm going to call my API. So the QPI is a little bit hidden with some parameters. I will get to that in a second. So the last part is customers. I will send this request, and now I'm accessing the Oracle Cloud to get that data from my customers view. It takes a while. It always takes longer the first time, and longer than you want, of course. There we are. So this is looks very raw, so I'll make it a little bit pretty. So now we have data in a JSON format from our database. So the only things that I did are 2 PL SQL statements. I enabled the schema, and I enabled this view for external access. And those are the only 2 things I did. And now I already have an API that I can use for other purposes. So what does an URL, an auto REST URL look like? So the first part is referring to the environment. So it says apexconsulting.nl, which is an alias for something in the Oracle Cloud, but can also be localhost or whatever. And then API, which is the second part, is of course the schema that I enabled, and then customers is the object that I enabled. But that's not it. There is more to that. So as customers is a view, or also if it was a table, I could add more to that URL. I could just use /1, and then I will get the customer with the ID, the primary key /1. So there is a little bit of a trick for tables. It just works. But if your object that you enabled is a view, of course, a view doesn't have a primary key. And then you get an error, missing primary key. So to work around that for views, and in my opinion, you should use views, because you should not use the real data on a schema that's accessible from the outside world. You have to tell the Oracle database that there is a fake primary key just by saying that command that's on the bottom, Alt view, my customer view, add constraint, rely, disable, not validate. That you'll just say to the Oracle database, trust me, there is a primary key, please use it. And then this trick just works. Apart from going to a primary key, you can also issue a query. So you can just say customer / Q is, and then customer state of Virginia, for instance, or any other column and any other value behind that. Or you can just use some secret reserved words like order by. So you can just use an order by for the output. Or use an offset and a limit. So I can just say, in this case, start with the second record and give me just 2. So I can create some pagination if there wouldn't be any. But we only did a get right now. So, but we already got more by just issuing that one statement. If we issue this command, select method, etc., from user OAuth services, then we see that we got way more than just a get. So the get was the second part in this list. We also have a delete, post, another post, another delete, a get and a put. So the get with customer /ID, that's the one I explained earlier. And so we got a lot of possible requests that we can issue than just get our data. So we can also use a post, for instance. And the post looks like this. I have to specify each and every column, and otherwise missing elements will be updated to 0. So if we going that into my demo thingy, where is it? Over here. So let's insert a customer, for instance. So URL is exactly the same customers. The only thing that's changed is the method over here And in the body, I specify all the columns. So I can just send this to the database, and its response is what it did insert into the database. So this is not just an echo of what I did before, but it also says all the other elements that are in there, and the relations and the reference to the keys, etc. Very similar, I can do a put request, and then in the put request, I use the ID at the end, and in the body, I specify all the columns again. So this is just what we call an update. The only difference with the update as we know it is that you have to specify each and every column, otherwise they will be nil. And very similar to that, I can do a delete. So I can delete that same thing again that I just inserted earlier, number 10, and then it responds with row deleted as 1. So again, I issue 2 statements, enable schema and enable object for the view, and I can do all data manipulations on that view, on that data already through the URL. So, but so say missing elements will be updated to nil, and a delete looks like that. So this for what I did, the coding that I did, it's pretty amazing. But I can also REST other objects like PL/SQL objects. So we did it with views, and exactly the same as with tables, but a lot about procedures, functions, etc. You can do that as well. So there is a little bit of difference. So the other ones with tables and views, we had a lot of methods to our proposal. But here, it's also always a post. And if you're using a procedure, it can return something. So, and as usual, as we're using in the PL/SQL world, we use out parameters for result sets. So that's the same over here. And a function returns always something as well. It's a JSON object, and with the name tilde red, and then the output of that function. And we'll see an example of that in a minute. You can also do that for packages, and URL looks then something like API, which was again the name of the schema, the package alias, which you can provide if you enable that object, and the object name. So you enable a whole package, so all functions, all procedures in there, and the object names in there are accessible by the object name in capitals. And if you understand the way URL works, overloading is not an option, because overloading results all in the same endpoints. So you can't use overloading in these kind of things. So be aware, if you open up a package, if you enable a package, then everything that's in that package is accessible from the outside world. So let's go to script 3a. So what I'm creating here is some procedures, procedure 1, function 1, a package, and a package body. And then I just enable this object. So the code is very simple, just like I saw before. Object name, object type, and object alias. So again, don't give away anything. Your alias should be totally different from what's inside the database, and probably meaningful to the end user, which is another developer. So I run these little scripts. And once we've done that, we got a lot more options to our proposal. So already 11 says. So if you see, let's scroll this up a bit. So what I'm asking here at the bottom is, what are my enabled objects? And there are these these 4 objects. So we got a view, we got a function, a package, and procedure. And what kind of services do we have? Of course, you have everything on customers, you already seen it, and we got post services on procedure, function, and package. So let's try some of them. So if I've got a procedure here, and just say run this thing, so there is nothing in the body here. Of course, you got some hidden headers, but that's just internal ones for Postman. Just send this over, and it returns always something. In this case, it just returns an empty JSON string because we didn't specify any out parameters. If you're doing it for that same for that function, sending that over, what do we get? Again, we get a JSON string back. It says return, which is the standard object, and nil because we didn't specify. We just return nil as a value. And the same for a package function, but be aware this function of procedure, whatever you're using, is in capitals. So these are all the enabled objects I already got. So we're building our baseline quite big. And we can specify, I'm going to play around with return values. So we're going to specify an out parameter in a procedure and then something more meaningful than nil in the function. So let's go to script 3b. 3b, which is over here. So we got a procedure 2, which adds something and specifying 2 parameters. So let's see how that works out. I got a function which returns something and also has an out parameter. So a function that returns something and has an out parameter is a bit weird, but let's see how that turns out, how that works in the output. Let's create these functions and procedures. So we go to procedure 2. And I will show you what I specified. Parameters. The parameters are specified in the body. So I can just say P number 1, P number 2. Those are the 2 parameters that we're getting in. And the answer, the result of my procedure, are the 2 out parameters. So P result is 9 and the answer is 42. So whatever I'm putting as out parameter is shown here. So if you're using, for instance, another piece of code, so this is just Postman running, but probably you want to code it somewhere else. So there's some feature here in Postman which is pretty neat. You can just say, give me the code, whether I would use it in any other language. So I can use it in jQuery, and then it looks like this. Or I can use it in just HTTP is not very interesting. If I use it in a shell script, it would look like this. So you can exactly copy and paste this stuff over here and use it in your favorite Node.js piece of code or wherever it is. There's no PL/SQL code snippet over here, but you can also use it in PL/SQL, of course. So if you're running it for a function, again, the body of the function is number 1 and number 2. Send this over, and the result is over here. So the first one is the standard output, and this is the second one is the out parameter we got earlier. Then you might think, so, hey, I can play along. Just a number is not good enough for something that I would like to create. Can I create some more? And then, for instance, would it be possible to create something like an out parameter, which is a row type? That would be interesting because that is way more powerful. Or maybe if I can create something like a return value that's a row type. So if I'm running these scripts, There's a function get customer. So ID 4, so the idea is I'll get something back. Send this over. And then it says, oh, server error. What do I get back? Preview. Internal server error. Request could not be processed. Invalid column type. So apparently, you cannot run, oops, this one, a complex result set as a record. So no row type, no record. It cannot be an out parameter, it cannot be a return value from a function. That's too bad. But the good news is we can create something that's even better than that. We can have JSON result set by using a sysref cursor. So how does that look? So I already created that. So let's proceed to 3. Send this over. So as a result over here, this is my result parameter, and I get back a lot of data. So exactly the same data that was already in the view. And in the function, doing the same thing, I get the same thing back, and but then it's prefixed with the red tilde red standard return value, and it's a complete JSON object. So how did I create that? That's very easy, because, for instance, for the procedure, there's one out parameter, p result, and the out is a sysref cursor. And the only thing I'm doing here is saying open p result for select any query. So that's a very limited amount of coding for the effect that I have over there. So I can create very rich JSON objects. And the same is for, of course, for a function. I'm just returning that sysref cursor. And after that, I'm just enabling all those objects again, of course. But that's a standard trick now. So that's one piece of the puzzle. But if you want a nested JSON result set, how do you do that? You can use the same trick, sysref cursor, but then returning a nested cursor. So let's take a look at that piece of code. It's this one. So the code is a little bit bigger. So I'm creating procedure number 4. So look at the name of the out parameter. So I'm using it, just give it this name sales. So not like usually you have some kind of coding standard that and parameters should have p underscore, or p out parameter should use p o underscore something. But in this case, I'm just using sales. And in sales, I just querying all my data, more or less. So that's in my view. So I'm starting with my view, saying select my customers' data, and within the customer data, I open up a nested cursor for my orders and another one for my order line. So if I'm running this as a script, so now this procedure is created and enabled, of course. Go to procedure 4. Send this over. Now we get a very nice formatted piece of JSON. So first thing you notice, it started with sales, not something with p underscore. So this is something that a JavaScript developer would appreciate if you give it a meaningful name and not like more like an internal name like p underscore. And within that, you got a nested JSON object. So we got customers, orders, and within orders, we got order items, etc. And this is not just a small one. It returns in 2.5 seconds. I think it's 3,000 lines or something like that of JSON. So that's pretty amazing. And we on our side, on the database side, we only created one query, one SQL statement. And Of course, you can add parameters to your procedure to make it even more functional. So, and if just enabling objects, PL/SQL objects, is not enough, you can define other services and full control by creating blocks of PL/SQL in the sources of services. So, for instance, something like that, where you have a part and the modules like sales and customers, and with the customer ID, and then you just say select star from my customers, where customer ID is whatever. But in this case, you can simply replace that with a view or a procedure. But if the source is more complex, so you need to do something more with status codes, etc., then this might be an option for that. But I think all the rest is to prefer before defining your own services. And why is that? Because everything is in your database. It's just pieces of PL/SQL, just procedures, views, functions, etc. And everything is reusable. So you can reuse the same code in your Apex application, in your Oracle Forms application for that matters, and in your APIs. It's easier to test. So everything that's easier to test is, if you run it inside your database, these blocks are easier to test than testing the output of an HTTP request. It's compiled, so it's a little bit faster, but more important and most important, there is dependency analysis. So if you're defining something as a module in ORDS, that's just a piece of block of PL/SQL. In fact, it's just a block of text. The same thing applies if you're coding PL/SQL in Apex. It's just a block of text. There is no dependency analysis. And if you drop a column or drop a view, you won't notice. You're not getting some kind of alarm somewhere until your customer actually uses that page, or in this case, uses this request, and then it will return an error. So if you can, please use auto-rest. But there is more, of course. You can also use full SQL power over REST, not just PL/SQL and everything that's pre-cooked, but each and every SQL statement you can run over REST. If you want to enable SQL over REST, you have to make one change in your ORDS configuration, and this entry should be set to true. REST enabled SQL.active equals true. And this is already, if you're using the Oracle free tier, then this is already active, so you can use it over there. And of course, you have to use HTTPS, because you have to use this, we have to send over usernames and password over the net. So then it's very smart to use HTTPS, otherwise someone might get your username and password, of course. And the URL looks a bit weird, so it's the API, which is the schema I enable. So then the schema has to be enabled to enable SQL, and be aware, you can run that SQL if you have the username and password for each and every schema that's been enabled. So I have enabled this schema, so if I have the username and password, I can just go into the database over your URL and issue any commands. So the API, the URL looks a bit weird, like API and then an underscore, and then SQL at the end. So what you're sending over is has a different content type than usual. It says application SQL. That's the content type you have to specify. And you can run several things. You can just run one statement, and we'll see that in a minute. You can run a SQL file, or you can run a JSON file containing multiple statements. So let's see how that looks like. So we're going over here. So what we're running here In the body, we specify select sysdate from dual. And in the headers, of course, you got a username and password specified. Luckily, you don't see them because everything is recorded. Should not be very smart to show that somewhere. And the content type over here is application SQL, as you can see. And you're going to send this over to _SQL. So select sysdate from dual, and the answer is, of course, not 42 in this case, but it says the time is 8:36, which is the GMT time. Probably, I think it's, yeah. But you can also run a SQL file. And in our body, you just uploaded the binary file, which is a SQL file, and SQL file can contain all kinds of statements. So if you send this over, you can see the result in a second. It can it can contain a drop table, for instance. It can create a create table. It can create DML. It can create PL/SQL, and like here, so this just enables an object I created in my SQL file, and so that SQL file you just uploaded can do everything that you want. And last but not least, we can create a JSON file with SQL statements. So if our statement, so there's statement text and it just has some SQL commands, and I can send it over as well. And then it just says, this is my statement text, and says one row inserted, one row inserted, one row inserted. So this is extremely powerful, of course, because in effect you can do everything with your database that you can imagine just over a URL. So back to my presentation, it's over here. So the last part is about protection. So everything we did right now is just open to the public. So anyone can access that, and usually you don't want that. But you can also easily create a protected service. So in this case, we enable the object. The object is called OAuth secret. That's the name of my procedure, and the alias is secret. And the parameter p auto rest auth is set to true. So if I'm creating something like that, which is probably this one, nope, it's this one. Run this script. So it creates that procedure and does something more, but we get to that. So if I'm now calling this procedure without any authentication or authorization, and then it will give you an unauthorized error. So it is protected right now, so I need something to access that service. So what do I need? It's everything has to do with privileges and roles. So if you're creating something with auto rest, there's always privileges and roles are always created. If you're using that p auto rest auth, if it's set to true or false, or it's not there, still the privileges and roles are created. And they look a little bit like this, not a little bit, they look like this. It says Oracle DB Tools Auto Rest privilege, so that's the privilege, and then it's ORDS API, which is the schema name, and OAuth secret, which is the object name. And for a role, it's the same thing. So we got a privilege and a role. So the naming conventions is a little bit weird, because first one is Oracle DB Tools Auto Rest privilege, and then the other one is Oracle DB Tools Role Auto Rest. So why not the other way around? Either one of them. But in fact, it's creating a combination of roles and privileges to protect your resources. So, and only, so they are created, but they are not enabled if you're not using the p auto rest auth parameter. But you can easily use them or secure them later on because they're already there. And if you don't like the privileges and roles that are auto-created for you, you can create your own. So this is naming convention is read. So especially in SQL Developer, you can look into that and you see those privileges and roles created, and you can just use them to protect one or more resources. So you don't have to create a lot of them. So there are a lot of them are auto-created, but if you're doing by hand, you can just throw the old ones away and just say, I'm going to use a simple set of privileges to protect a lot of resources and not on a one-by-one basis. So how can I authenticate or authorize or whatever you call it? So there are a couple of options here. The first one is using ORDS itself with the roles defined in there. Or you can do it on maybe a lower level on Tomcat and Tomcat users file. But usually that's not so user-friendly. It's hard to maintain, etc. You can use it in the Oracle database, but as all these requests come from the outside world, it's very hard to know beforehand who is going to access your data, unless you're really strict to this, that only John can use my app, and I'm going to set something up and use John in the database and authenticate through the database as that. So usually in this kind of stuff, we're using OAuth too. So there is a little bit of difference in my opinion. It's called, everything is authorization, authentication. The first three is really authentication because you know who is accessing your service. And the last one is more about authorization because you don't know who is using it, but you know it's someone who has the key to the kingdom because you're in OAuth 2, you just give a key to someone and he can use it. So let's see how that works. There are a couple of steps. The first thing is you have to create an OAuth client. And therefore there is an OAuth procedure in the Oracle database nowadays. And just saying, I'm going to create a client and I'm going to use some kind of grant type. There are a couple of ones in this simple case. We're going to use client credentials. And within the client credentials, we're going to use the privilege I auto-created earlier, the one for my secret procedure. So that's the first step, create that client. And that's already done in the script I created earlier. The second step is that we should grant a role to that client. In this case, we gave it a name and saying, I'm going to use the role I created and grant that role to the client. And then a very important step is get that client ID and secret. So select client ID, client secret from user ORDS client, so that you get something like what's up down here. And we're going to use that for the next step to get a token. So we have already created these steps here. So we created the client, we created a role to the client and give us the client ID and client secret. And client ID and client secret is just here. I'm going to copy this, including these little dots at the end, because I'm going to use that in Postman to get my access token. So I'm going to get a new access token. The URL is OAuth token, which is always the same. So I'm going to give that a client ID over there and copy the client secret. Get it over there and then set just request my token, and it says, okay, I got you a new token which is valid for an hour. I'll use this token. That's already over here now. And if I have that token, I can use that token to request my service. So I'm going over here, and I said the token is this one, and send it over now, and now hopefully it will return my result. So I have unlocked the secret. So what's happened now is I'm got my token, and I'm using that token to call my protected service. So everyone with a token can use my procedure. So that's why I said it's more like authorization and not authentication, but because I have no clue who has my token. So you can get a token, as I said before, like a bearer. And they can use the token. So in this example on my sheet, it's using curl to use that token with a bit of authorization. And then Postman, I'm using a different way. And if you're using in PL SQL, you can use the same trick, a very similar trick. Carsten has wrote a couple of brilliant blogs about this kind of stuff. So if you want to know about this ORDS stuff more, everything is in the books. It's very well documented nowadays. So like in the early days, ORDS was not that well documented, and you had to rely on what people wrote in blogs, etc. But nowadays the documentation is very good. So, and it's still under development because Chris at 27th of June wrote this tweet, 27th of January, he's saying everything has a place and there's more fine-grained controls coming over all the rest of the table. So I don't know exactly what he's working on, but probably we can see something in the newer version of ORDS. So hopefully it will be, maybe it can support complex data types. That will be very nice, but you never know. And of course, if you're doing something like this, you get the praise of someone else who is think he's very brilliant as well. And with that, I want to thank you and my presentation. So if there are any questions, we got a couple of minutes left.
Thank you, Roel. Thanks for your presentation. Well done. I have a couple of questions in the Q&A. First one I want to ask you, is something available for upserts or merge statements in, when you use other REST-enabled objects?
As you can always use a view, and within a view you can use, instead of triggers, to do whatever you want. So there is no standard merge thing, so you have to build your own merge function procedure. Or you can call a merge statement, of course, in any procedure or function that you can think of, or in a trigger on a view, but not directly from URL.
Okay. Another question. Can you have one ORDS instance pointing to multiple Apex versions that would say multiple PDBs with Apex installed on them?
Yes. Yes, you can.
Very good.
On my laptop, I actually have that. I got a PDB with 19.1 and another one with 19.2, and I have one ORDS instance running on that. But that goes, there is a blog by Jason Straub. I think that's the one that has the most detailed information on that. You have to point your ORDS configuration to the CDB, and then it forwards to the PDBs. But it's too far it's too detailed for now for this part to get into that. But it's possible, and Jason has something with multi-tenant. Jason Straub, multi-tenant ORDS. If you're Googling for these things, then you'll find it.
Okay. And then people notice that you use PL SQL commands to create these REST-enabled objects or your own module, stuff like that, security. Could you do this through Apex as well?
Yes, there is for Apex, and you can do it in SQL Developer as well, also. But then it's just you can define it, so it does. In the end, it does the same trick. But usually, you have to use this code to promote it to a next environment. So you do need some piece of code what you did in development to promote it to the test environment into production. So you can create it in Apex and SQL Developer and then generate that code from there. But sometimes it's better to understand what's happening behind the scenes if you do the actual coding yourself. So there are multiple ways of doing that.
Okay. And I noticed you're using Visual Studio Code instead of SQL Developer. Is that a personal preference? And what is your idea to use Visual Code instead of SQL Developer?
No, in fact, on my normal work day, using both. But I really like Visual Studio Code, and especially if you can just deploy your code to the database with just the press of a button or a hotkey or whatever I'm doing right over here. Because everything is file-based, all your code is file-based, should be file-based, is in Git, and if you're doing it in Visual Studio Code, you're absolutely sure that everything you do is on file-based and your file first, and after that you're putting it in the database. Mostly I'm using SQL Developer to query the database. So I'm doing some tests or running some scripts. I'm doing coding my select statements over there to see what's in the tables. But actual coding, like coding packages, procedures, functions, so I'm using Visual Studio Code.
Okay. Sorry. Some questions about protection. So is there a max lifetime for an OAuth token that you can specify?
The one you get by default is 1 hour. Can you specify another one? Probably, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Another one about protection is, can you use ACL, that's access control list, for protection of the endpoints?
ACL is for if you pointing at the ACL that's inside the database, that's only used for access from inside the database to the outside world. So this, what we're doing right here, is the other way around, from the outside world inside the database. So we cannot use that type of ACL. So there probably is some other ACL kind of things you can use on Apache or whatever, but that's a different story.
And then on performance, would you use ORDS in standalone modes with Jetty or deployed in Tomcat, for example? Do you have tips about performance?
I don't think that the performance worse or better inside of Tomcat or standalone. It's just a matter of preference and manageability, I guess. I don't know. So in the early days, the Oracle Cloud used ORDS in standalone mode. So I'm not sure what the current configuration is, but if Oracle says you can do, if Oracle runs it in standalone mode, then you can do it as well. But I prefer to have it in Tomcat because I can just spin off Tomcat, and then on my local machines, I just have a set of Docker images that do all the tricks. So yeah. I've got one that runs Docker, that runs ORDS inside of Tomcat, because you can configure a little bit more around ORDS.
And then I have a more advanced question, sort of kind of same topic. If you use Nginx or Apache as a reverse proxy in front, can you pass the errors from ORDS, proxy pass those?
I need a helpline.
Well, we keep it open. We'll get back to you with the correct answer.
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know.
No, it's okay. And then the last one before we take a break, and next one is Daniel Hochleitner. What's your personal best for your marathon running?
4 hours and 10 minutes and something.
Wow, impressive.
No, not under the 4 hours. That's the magic barrier. Or for me, at least, it's a magic barrier.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Roel. Excellent.